During World War II, artillery killed more soldiers than any other weapon. But for years, most of that killing power was being wasted. Explosions were happening at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and entire armies survived barrages that should have wiped them out. Hidden behind secrecy and classified orders, a small technological change quietly reshaped warfare. It didn't look powerful. It didn't explode bigger. Yet it turned near misses into mass casualties and transformed how the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and airborne forces fought across the battlefield. In the Pacific War, and later in Europe, this invisible shift made artillery several times more lethal, altering epic battles and redefining military history. Soldiers and veterans would later describe it as fighting an enemy you couldn't see or escape. What was this secret order? And how did one decision turn U.S. artillery into the deadliest weapon of the Second World War? Before answering, we need to go back to where the problem really began. At the start of World War II, artillery was already the dominant killer on the battlefield, but it was also deeply flawed. Both the U.S. Army and German forces relied on shells equipped with time fuses or simple impact fuses. These systems demanded precise calculations, trained crews, and a margin of luck. A shell that detonated too early wasted lethal energy in the air. A shell that detonated too late buried itself in the ground, trapping fragments and reducing its killing radius. In military history, artillery looked powerful, but much of its destructive potential was mathematically squandered in real combat conditions. The structural problem was physics itself. Lethality depends on fragments moving horizontally through exposed bodies. When shells exploded after ground impact, soil absorbed much of the blast. Soldiers, in trenches, foxholes, or behind small terrain features, often survive massive barrages. This limitation applied equally to American, German, and Japanese forces across the European and Pacific battlefields. Bigger guns did not solve it. More shells did not solve it. The battlefield problem was not firepower, but detonation geometry. In the Second World War, artillery had reached a lethal plateau defined by its fuse. Solving this problem was far from obvious. In 1940, as war expanded across Europe, the United States created the National Defense Research Council to mobilize science for warfare. One of its most radical efforts became Section T, led by physicist Merle Tuve at the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism. British scientists had already explored proximity concepts for bombs and rockets, but their devices could survive only minimal stress. Field artillery imposed forces exceeding 20,000 Gs while spinning at extreme rotational speed. No electronic device was supposed to survive that environment, let alone function reliably. The technical challenge bordered on absurdity. Engineers needed to place a battery, transmitter, receiver, and detonator inside the nose of a spinning shell smaller than a wine bottle. The device had to remain dormant in storage, arm itself after firing, and operate flawlessly while traveling faster than sound. Scientists described the goal as building a microscopic radar station that could survive being slammed by a hammer thousands of times per second. This was not incremental innovation. It was a conceptual leap at the intersection of radiophysics, materials science, and military necessity. By 1942, after relentless testing, failures, and redesigns, the impossible device began to work. It survived gunfire. It transmitted signals. It sensed targets. Yet success created a new dilemma. If the enemy captured even one unexploded shell, they could reverse engineer the technology. That fear would shape how, where, and when the weapon was used. Before it transformed the battlefield, the proximity fuse first had to remain invisible. Who would decide when secrecy mattered more than survival? And if you enjoyed diving into military history, war decisions, and the hidden systems that shaped epic battles of World War II, take a second to support this channel. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. It helps keep these war stories alive, because now the story moves from laboratories and calculations to a single classified order. The proximity fuse worked by redefining what a miss meant in warfare. Inside the shell's nose was a miniature radio transmitter that continuously emitted a signal as the projectile flew. When that signal reflected off an Objecon aircraft fuselage, the ground, or a cluster of soldiers though reflected wave, triggered an automatic detonation. Distance, not impact, became the trigger. A shell no longer needed perfect aim. Passing close was enough. In military history, this single mechanism converted near misses into airbursts, and airbursts into mass casualties. Artillery was suddenly killed not by precision alone, but by probability multiplied across the battlefield. This transformation was first unleashed far from Europe. In the Pacific War, in early 1943, U.S. Navy ships faced relentless Japanese dive bomber attacks. Traditional anti-aircraft fires struggled, especially at night. On January 6, 1943, the USS Helena fired shells equipped with proximity fuses at a Japanese aircraft. With little time to aim, 3 shells exploded near the target and destroyed it. It was the first confirmed kill using the new fuse. From that moment, naval warfare changed. Proximity-fused shells proved 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional fuses, and night kill rates increased by 370%. The U.S. Navy quickly understood it was holding a decisive advantage. The results were staggering. In 1943 alone, only 25% of American anti-aircraft rounds used proximity fuses, yet they accounted for more than half of all aircraft destroyed. The lethal fragment area expanded from roughly 60 square feet to nearly 3,000 square feet per shell. Japanese pilots were flying into invisible minefields of exploding steel. For sailors, Marines, and carrier crews, the device became a silent guardian. For commanders, it was something else, a secret that could not be allowed to spread. From the beginning, the project carried a top-secret classification. The fear was simple and existential. If Germany captured an unexploded shell and reverse-engineered it, Allied bomber fleets could be annihilated. The U.S. Army Air Forces depended on massed formations of aircraft. A German proximity fuse could turn flak into a killing machine. Because of that risk, strict orders prohibited the use of the fuse over land, where recovery by enemy troops was possible. For nearly 2 years, soldiers died under conventional artillery while a solution existed, locked behind classification stamps and restricted orders. That restraint broke only under extreme pressure. In June 1944, Germany began launching V-1 flying bombs against London. The missiles were small, fast, and difficult to intercept. Britain's defenses were failing. In response, the United States authorized the first land-based use of proximity fuses, but only for air defense. Within weeks, shells equipped with a fuse were destroying up to 79% of incoming V-1 South. London was saved not by new aircraft or radar, but by a secret American order, releasing a hidden weapon. Once again, administration changed the course of the war. Only months later, another crisis forced a second decision. In December 1944, German forces launched a surprise offensive in the Ardent, the Battle of the Bulge. American lines buckled under the assault. In response, restrictions on proximity fuse use were lifted for ground combat. This was the moment George Patton witnessed firsthand. Shells detonated above German infantry, showering trenches and forests with steel. One engagement alone killed 702 German soldiers, an event Patton described as devastating. German prisoners reported that there was no defense against the bursts. Foxholes offered no protection. Terrain no longer mattered. The effect was psychological as much as physical. German troops learned that simply being detected meant death. Unlike conventional barrages, proximity-fused fire arrived without warning and with perfect timing. Infantry formations were shredded before they could disperse. Commanders found attacks collapsing before contact. The battlefield itself seemed hostile. This was not just a new shell. It was a new environment of warfare, where exposure equaled vulnerability. Yet the fuse alone did not explain American dominance. U.S. artillery functioned as a system. Forward observers, often flying an L-4 Piper Cub aircraft, identified targets and relayed coordinates in real time. Fire direction centers calculated firing solutions across multiple batteries. Time-on-target missions ensured shells from dozens of guns landed simultaneously. When proximity fuses were integrated into this system, lethality multiplied. German artillery, fragmented and logistically strained, could not match this coordination. The American advantage was not a weapon, but a network. Behind the front lines, industrial scale made the transformation permanent. By the end of the war, more than 22 million proximity fuses had been produced. 112 companies participated in the effort. It became one of the largest scientific industrial projects of World War II, rivaled only by radar and the atomic bomb. Yet unlike those technologies, the fuse operated quietly, anonymously, without a single defining explosion to mark its importance. Its success was measured in abscess: fewer planes reaching ships, fewer enemy attacks succeeding, fewer American casualties. By the time secrecy was lifted, the damage was done. The order had been given. The battlefield had changed. Artillery was no longer just heavy firepower. It had become an algorithm of death, triggered by distance, probability, and coordination. And once unleashed, there was no way to return to the old mathematics of war. What happens when victory depends not on courage or steel, but on who controls the invisible systems first? When World War II is remembered, its symbols are obvious: tanks crossing borders, soldiers storming beaches, and the blinding flash of the atomic bomb. The proximity fuse rarely appears in popular war stories because it lacked spectacle. It did not level cities in one moment. Instead, it quietly altered thousands of battles. While nuclear weapons ended the war politically, the proximity fuse reshaped it tactically, day after day, shell after shell. In military history, it became one of the most decisive technologies, precisely because it worked invisibly, embedded inside systems soldiers never fully saw. The deeper lesson is uncomfortable. The United States did not dominate the battlefield because it built the biggest guns. German and American artillery calibers were often comparable. The difference was systemic. The U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and airborne units integrated science, industry, communication, and doctrine into a single killing machine. The proximity fuse only reached its full potential when paired with forward observers, fire direction centers, and time-on-target missions. Warfare was no longer about individual weapons, but about networks that compressed detection, decision, and destruction into seconds. General Dwight D. Eisenhower later reflected that if Germany had perfected and deployed proximity fuses earlier, the Allied invasion of Europe might have been impossible. That statement reframes victory itself. Wars are not always decided by bravery or numbers, but by timing and secrecy. The secret order delaying and then unleashing the fuse determined when its impact would be maximal and irreversible. By the time Germany encountered it on land, there was no counter, no adaptation, and no defense. The outcome had already been mathematically sealed. The legacy of that decision extends far beyond the Second World War. Modern missile systems like Patriot and Phoenix still rely on the same principle: detonation by proximity, not impact. The logic born inside an artillery shell now defines air defense, naval warfare, and battlefield automation. What began as a solution to wasted explosions became a foundation of modern combat systems. In the end, the deadliest weapon of World War II was not a cannon, a bomber, or a bomb. It was a decision when to reveal a secret, when to keep it hidden, and when to turn mathematics into massacre. And that raises a final question that still matters today. How many future wars will be decided not on the battlefield, but in rooms where invisible orders are signed?